Hello, I am Ryan Womack, Data Librarian at Rutgers University Libraries. This is the first video in a short playlist covering the workshop Data Publication 1, which is about creating reproducible research and literate programming documents using knitr, Sweave, Quarto, blogdown, and bookdown. There is a Data Publication 2 workshop that talks about data sharing and the creation of R packages for the sharing of data. So that's a continuation, an extension of this, but here we're just getting started. And this is part of the Data Topics series. The links to all of these things will be in the description. The Data Topics series covers various aspects of working with data analysis, visualization, data sources, data publication, and some special topics as well. So you can also check that link for related content if you're interested in data. So for this workshop, I'm going to work from this one web page that we have on the screen right now. As a description of what we're seeing, I want to also point out these other formats on the right hand side. This is the same content but reformatted different ways. So if you wanted, for example, a PDF version to take out a print, take away or print, you can use that. There's R script for the code that we're running. There's Quarto, which is the literate programming framework that I used to create all these documents. It allows you to format documents and run R code and analysis in the same file. Not only R code, but Python and other things. There are the videos that are linked here. And if you prefer a dark mode HTML, you can just click the button and switch over there. I often do prefer a dark mode, but I am going to stick on the light side for today's presentation. So, continuing. Now let's get into the meat of the workshop, of the presentation. And in this session, I'm going to cover sections 1, 2, and 3. And then to break up the video a little bit, the subsequent videos in the playlist will cover the other sections in the table of contents. So this video is all me talking and giving you the background. The next video about part 4 with literate programming will actually get into the R coding. So just to set the stage first, section 1, why data publication? What do we mean by that? Well, data publication here, I'm specifically talking about you're writing typically a scholarly research article, communicating your research in article, book, or blog form, or but it's based on research data. It's data intensive research. And so how we handle the data as it goes from our initial analysis into releasing it into the world is part of what we want to think about and do carefully and do well. So we want to ensure that the data behind a publication gets the same careful attention, visibility, and usefulness as the written article or other form of publication, and so that others can understand, validate, and possibly reuse the data in the future. I won't belabor that point, but that's the why. A second thing in section 2 is the setup. Later, in the later sections, we're going to use a couple of specific packages, blogdown and bookdown. You may want to make sure you have those on your system. I'm not going to demonstrate these in the video because I'm already set up for that. But this is some setup code. I have moved from using the default install packages command in R to using the package, which to my mind handles things a little more cleanly and lets you know what's going on in a nicer way. but that's purely optional if you use the pack version of these commands or just the default R commands. And I should also mention in this workshop, I'm going to assume some familiarity with R. You can go back and look at some of the other workshops that are more about getting started with R. And there is a link on my YouTube channel to a Getting Started in R basic video about installation and where you get all this stuff that we're going to look at. So that's there as well, but I'm not going to cover it in this video. So, section 3, reproducibility. So this is a concept that we're going to mention a lot, but I want to define it for you, tell you where it's coming from. If we think about science, right, we think about experiments, getting in the lab, trying things out, repeating things in the lab and making sure they happen over and over again in a consistent way. And this is the core, or one of the cores of the scientific method. That's what I'm describing right now. Redoing an experiment is often described as replication, when we're actually physically doing something again. This can sometimes be very expensive. It's a good thing, right? But it can be very expensive if we're talking about collecting samples from the moon. We've tried that, but it's expensive. You have a limited number of opportunities to do such things, and some things are not really replicable at all. If you're thinking about a specific event, a star, supernova explodes, it's not coming back, can't try that again. An earthquake happens, it's a specific place and time. Or a social science event, stock market crash or a recession, they don't happen on command. We can compare similar events, but we can't repeat an event. And so it's important to capture as much information as we can about those events and give researchers the tools to keep studying them, reuse the data. In particular, if there's funding involved for the research, we want to make sure that that funding is being put to good use and is building some assets for the future, is not being wasted. So after replication, the concept that has come into circulation more recently is reproducibility. When we say reproducibility in this context, we are talking about primarily the computational side of things. So these days, whatever the sensors are, whatever the methods are, we often end up with data, a representation of data, whether that's numeric or that's a video recording or whatever, on a computer someplace. And there's that digital data itself, and we use analysis tools, statistical software, other things, statistical code to clean, process, analyze, visualize the data in ways that lead to our final results and conclusion. And even if someone is not able to repeat an experiment, what we'd like people to be able to do is to inspect all that data, see exactly the type of analysis that was done to it, and to run that analysis and make sure that everything shook out the way the original researchers said it did. Or if a researcher has a different idea, to be able to take what was done and modify it, run additional tests in furtherance of greater understanding of that research. Another strong motivator in this is to ensure the quality of the research record, and this has been driven in some sense by problems that have occurred in the past. I'll refer you to the link here to the Duke starter set. This is one particular, not the only case, but one well-known case where some statisticians got curious about a particular line of research. As they started to dig into it, they found statistical anomalies and eventually concluded that the researcher fabricated data, and led to a big black eye for not only the researcher in that group. This was major, millions of dollars of funding on cancer therapy, a black eye for Duke University, and these kind of events happen, and funders start to say, and the public starts to say, we need to inspect your stuff. We can't just take your word on it. We need to know what you're doing. Therefore, this building movement towards greater reproducibility, at the same time, 15 years ago, you see this movement where funders also start to require data management plans to make sure that researchers are making their data available. This issue that I've just clicked on is a 2011 Science special issue that really was one of the first major attention placed on this issue in the sense that I'm describing. So it's been out there for a while, but it is still a case of we've got to make progress with this in every year that passes. As I mentioned here in the webpage, the days of contact the author to request data and code are passing. Even if your funder let you get away with that, it's probably reputationally not ideal. All right, and so the final piece that I'll talk about in this video segment is data management itself. And I'm just going to say a little bit about it because there is a link that I encourage you to click through, which is our library's detailed guide on data management, links to all the current policies, links to tools that you can use to help you with this process. And so I encourage you to check that out. But I'll just say a little bit about it. So data management, essentially what we're talking about is doing a good job of collecting your data, organizing your data, making it so that others can look at that and understand it. I always like to make the point that, if you're going back to your own research 3 or 4 years from now, you need to check something else or someone's asked you a question, your memory is not infallible either. So good documentation helps you work with your own data. And then when we share it, we want it to be easily well-structured and easily usable. So just to briefly run through these 4 bullets, you want to keep your raw data separate. Like you've got some original data collection. In rare cases, there might be some sensors, right, that just suck in so much raw data. There's too much data to be stored, and you need to pre-process it to kind of keep only the pieces you think you need. But unless you're in that kind of situation, like keep everything that you've collected and just keep a copy that you never touch, like raw data folder, back it up and everything. But there's a raw data, so any decisions you later make to filter the data, or you come across something that suggests maybe you could have done something different, you have that raw data to go back to. God forbid also you make a mistake in cleaning or preparing the data and get rid of something significant. You've got that raw data to go back to. The second bullet, document your variables, right? So This form of documentation varies by discipline. In some social sciences, you have a code book that describes all of the potential responses, for example, to a survey question. A data dictionary might be an Excel file that lists all the variables and comments on a little bit how they're structured or the values they might take. Or it could simply be a README file that is relatively brief, but as long as that is enough for someone who is not already familiar with the data to come in and look at your collection of data and understand how it's structured, that can work. But a point I would make is it's easier to document all this stuff early in the process while it's fresh in your mind. It may seem like a step that's getting in the way of you know, jumping in and doing the analysis, and getting to your research, but it's going to be a lot harder to document completely and properly, 2 years down the road when some of the details are forgotten. So strongly encourage you to document. You're also making it more likely that others will find your data easy to use and understand it and attribute significance to it. So that's part of the communication process. The third bullet is, you want to document how you worked with the data, including the data cleaning steps and the analysis steps. When you're working in a coding environment like R or Python, the code itself can serve as your documentation with some commenting to explain what each step is doing. If you were working in a manual point and click type of environment, that's very problematic in the long run. So things like Excel, I wouldn't really recommend you rely on those, because if someone asks you, how did you modify or clean this data, you've got to have a separate step. You've got to have a notebook or something where you're saying, I took this column of data and I filtered it this way. I ran a macro, or I clicked here and deleted these entries. That can be very difficult for others to follow, right? They're not watching you on your screen, but if you provide a code-based solution, everyone can follow those steps. And then finally, the final step to make sure your data is available in a well-structured, easy-to-use format. And what I mean by that, one illustration of it is this project template, which is an R package that will get you started with creating a project. And this has some simple commands that like create.project that will set up a structure for you. And what I mean by that is, you've got a research project here. The directory called letters is the sort of project directory, but inside you keep all those little pieces separate, like the raw data that we talked about, processed data, documentation, code, the write-ups and reports that are generated from the data could be separate. The byproducts like the graphs and tests that are produced by your code can be stored separately. And when you have a directory, I'm not saying this exact directory structure that we're looking at on the screen is what you need, but something that separates those pieces into easily understood groupings so that an end user, a new user, doesn't come to the data and see 99 files numbered 1 to 99, and they start to open them up, and each one is something different. One is a graph, one is a snippet of code, things like that. The directory structure helps this communication process. And that's all I'll say about data management, because in the subsequent segments, we will get into the next phases of this concept, starting with literate programming. But I'll take a break, pause this video, and let you jump to the next in the playlist for that information. So thank you.